Hey everyone, welcome back to One Piece Paneling Dojo, the show where we talk about One Piece's paneling, composition, and visual storytelling. Today we are on a break week, and that means it's the perfect time to talk about a past chapter, so this week we will be talking about Chapter 1000. Not just one of the most iconic chapters in the story for its number, but iconic for what happens in it. So let's dig into how the visuals and paneling back up those events and make them hit so hard. The first thing that stands out to me about this page is the gorgeous triangular composition that defines this spread. It's the kind of thing that just makes a page more interesting to look at than if the characters were all lined up in a flat way. You have this nice depth between Kid in the foreground and Law in the background, we have these rocks emphasizing the shape, and we even have the sound effects completing the triangle. This sound effect placement is very deliberate because it's signifying the fight that's about to happen between these characters. It wouldn't do that if it was over here or down here. Now, the most important thing that this page does is set up the relative positions of the fighters. Not just that the supernovas are lined up to attack the emperors as we see here, but that for the page as a whole, the supernovas are on the right and the emperors are on the left. Not just here in the spread, but even in where their close-ups are positioned. Now, this kind of positioning is important because it means that you can rely on it. You will consistently be able to see, as this fight goes on, not even really in this chapter, but in the next few chapters of this fight following this, that the characters we are rooting for are going to be on the right, that their attacks are going to be going this way, and our eye is going to move in the same direction as the motion. This is not going to be done 100% of the time, because every situation is different. Sometimes you need something else for the paneling, but this is very consistent and helps make it a lot easier to keep track of the fight. Now, something that's cool about this page is that it can pretty much be read in any order. Your eye can start up here and go along here before being drawn down with Big Mom and Kaido, or it can go all the way over here and then start over here to go this way, or you can start up here and immediately let your eye get distracted and travel down with all the characters. And this kind of thing is fine because there's nothing in these panels that would get spoiled by these panels. Now, the final thing that I like about this page is this little moment with this tight panel of Luffy where you see that he sees something, and then you get the payoff of what he sees. And this is a technique that's going to keep showing up in this chapter and that Oda uses a lot in general. When a character sees something, it needs to be a tight panel because a tight panel gives the reader the feeling of not seeing everything that there is. A tight panel is literally defined by what is not shown in it a lot of the time. And that payoff is then what Luffy sees. We have the same realization that Luffy is having, that all the other supernovas are here, and the people that they're going to fight are here. Oh, and one last thing I almost forgot to mention, size on the page is very big here. It emphasizes power, and not only are Big Mom and Kaido way bigger than most of the supernovas are, but even their close-up panels are wider than all the supernovas are getting. Now, we begin this page by once again using that same technique. A tight shot of Luffy, as we can see from his expression that he sees something, and then a fake reveal of what it is that he sees. This is something that intentionally doesn't make sense because he already knows that Big Mom and Kaido are there, so you're thinking, that can't be it, he already reacted to that last chapter, and that gets paid off on as we see that it's something further beyond them. We even maintain that cliffhanger throughout this full page, only saving it for the next page to get resolved. But the main point of this chapter is, of course, Luffy crossing between Big Mom and Kaido. We even have these speech bubbles emphasizing the line that he has walked straight through. And this is great, partially because it's pure visual storytelling. It is not just characterization, but an action, a choice by Luffy that is being shown purely through the visuals. This is actually a bit of a shonen tradition. There are some iconic pages from Dragon Ball and Hunter x Hunter that do the same thing, of the main character, or just the character with the power, walking past the person you'd expect them to fight. And I think it's really used well here because it's being used to show that Luffy prioritizes, as we'll see on the next page, caring about Kinemon over the people he's supposed to be fighting. And that's really important to who Luffy is. But my favorite thing about this page has to do with the layout as a whole. Because sure, in this panel you get this line that Luffy is implied to have crossed because we know he's here from this panel, and now we see him here. But also think about where Luffy is in this panel, and then where he is in this panel in the context of the page. Our eye is moving down with Luffy, following his motion, and as we go down, we quite literally travel between Big Mom and Kaido, just as Luffy physically did. That kind of integration, not just with the physical reality in the world, but on the page itself, is something pretty rare. Now this final shot not only continues the cliffhanger of what it is that Luffy saw and keeps his eyes a bit dark so we don't fully know his expression yet, but it sets up their physical positions in a way that's going to matter in the next couple pages. We know that Luffy is down here facing away from Kaido, we know that Kaido's up here above him, and we see that Kaido is kind of looking around like this to watch Luffy, and that is going to keep showing up and be important in a couple pages. And you can see that right here. This angle that Kaido was looking at makes perfect sense because we already understood his positions. This kind of over-the-shoulder behind-you look is not a way that characters usually look, but it flows fine and we totally understand where Kaido is and how he's looking at Luffy, even though this is such a tight shot because we had that last panel. And what's cool again is that he's not just looking at Luffy in world, he's also looking at him on the page, because he's looking down and to the left, and which way is Luffy but to his left and down from him. Imagine if this Kaido panel was here. You could probably rearrange the story so it would still make sense, it wouldn't be contradictory for this to be happening after these panels, but it needs to be on the right of the page so the direction he's looking in can match where Luffy is on the page. Now we keep on maintaining that little sense of tension before we get the resolution. First we have this panel that doesn't fully show us who it is that Luffy sees, and we get Luffy's expression cut off here so we don't know how he feels. Then we reveal that it's Kinemon, and then finally we get Luffy caring about Kinemon, but we don't even need these speech bubbles. Forget these speech bubbles. Just in the positioning, in the body language, in how close Luffy comes into Kinemon, we understand that he's not even bothering to be angry. His first priority is just taking care of his friend. Anger can come later, and all of that is told completely visually. The thing I really love about this moment is that it does the same technique that a lot of action paneling does, where our eye is moving in the same direction as the motion, as Luffy kind of crouches down and comes close to Kinemon, but that technique is being used here to convey kindness rather than violence, and that's something important to remember. The fighting is cool in One Piece, but it's not everything that you can do with manga as a medium. And now once again, that same technique appears, of a tight shot where Luffy sees something, and then the reveal of what he sees. And it's very deliberate that this shot is a little non-specific, it's a little undetailed, the characters are a little small, because even though you know it's probably that all the scabbards were defeated, you still have that same feeling of Luffy that you don't want to believe. You don't want to believe that the characters you were rooting for lost. Now, I think that what I would call this paneling here is one-by-one paneling. We could have just had a wide shot where we see all of them defeated more clearly than we did on the last page. That would work. But paneling is not just about big wide shots where you take it all in. Paneling is also about how you use individual panels in rhythm to convey a feeling. And the feeling I get by seeing them all in their own panels like this is a feeling of thoroughness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The 9 red scabbards, each one of them is here. Even if you aren't literally counting them as you read, them being shown with this rhythm conveys that nobody is being left out. The story is making sure to show each one of them, thus we understand that all of them are defeated. Nobody survived. Well, they're not dead, but they all failed. And the other thing I really like about this is how disparate the directions they're pointing in are. All of these lines are clashing with each other, there's no sense of order. Compared to the page we just talked about, where all the supernovas are over here, and all the emperors are over here, and everybody is looking in the directions they're supposed to. That conveys a sense of unity, a sense that these are the battle lines. Here, there is no battle line because they are in disarray, they are in chaos, because they were defeated. Now this first row of panels is a great example of how important paneling is just to conveying the tone and flow of a conversation, to convey the emotions the characters are going through. None of these panels are complex, but each one of them is what they needed to be. First we have this tight panel to convey the suddenness of an injured person grabbing your arm. Then in our wide panel, we have Kinemon talking to Luffy about trying to save all of Wano. A wide shot conveys scale, just as saving Wano was a task of such huge scale that we can't even conceive of here, and certainly wouldn't feel if this shot was a close-up. But the time for a close-up is when we focus on the emotions, when we focus on Luffy's declaration that he will fight to defend Wano. And of course, Kinemon's emotions, his reactions, are just as important. But as we move from that to the action, Our eye, of course, travels up along this mouth and travels along Kaido's club, perfectly drawing us up here. And it's very important for our eye to be up here because this panel essentially conveys the feeling that things are going to come crashing down. I love the sense of imagery you get of somebody raising their arm with a weapon like that, because on an instinctive level, you understand the motion that is implied to come next. Your brain is already bracing itself for this kind of downward motion to come on the next page. And when it does come, it hits harder because you were prepared for it. And as we reach our next page, we do have that downward motion, but we also see Luffy first. And this is a classic Dragon Ball technique that One Piece uses a lot too. Luffy is first on the page compared to the impact. Because when you read manga, you don't just go right to left, you also go top to bottom. And Luffy being first on the page conveys the feeling that he was already out of the way before the attack hit. Whereas if Luffy dodged, say, over here, then we would get the feeling that he barely dodged, that the attack hit, and he was just out of the way. But as our eye keeps moving down with the motion, it travels directly where it should to the next couple of panels. The thing I really love about this second panel is how, even though it's a totally different shot, even though this shot is looking way up, while this shot was looking way down, these characters are looking at the same impact that just happened. It gives us the feeling of, the roof and the floor below it. And as our eye keeps going down, we get that same effect we got when Kaido raised his club with Luffy raising his fist. Our eye is literally moving down in this direction, the direction that his fist is going to come flying in. It makes it easy to prepare ourselves for that motion. This is also just a great looking panel. I love how his hand is here in the foreground while his fist is in the background. It doesn't just look cool, but it gives us a sense of the distance that his fist is going to close as it moves. Now, as we go into the flashbacks, I think it's pretty important that we have a close-up of Luffy here, because we need to be shown that we are going into Luffy's head. And this is a normal technique. You will see this all the time in manga, but sometimes artists forget to do it, and when they do, going into the flashback can be a lot more jarring. These flashback panels are mostly their own things, mostly separate from each other. But as we go back into the action, now we're looking down at Kaido with a sense of speed implied by all of these lines that were going into him. We understand that we're essentially from Luffy's perspective here, or maybe from the perspective of Luffy's fist. And I love the sense of rhythm here. There's a back and forth. Luffy, Kaido. Luffy, Kaido. That kind of back and forth just keeps the tension up in a way that's kind of lost if you see the same character twice in a row in this kind of quick action sequence. And of course, Luffy and all of these lines are directing us straight down into the fist, and our eye is moving along with this motion as we slam into Kaido. And the imagery of this fist slamming into Kaido is pretty nuanced. On one hand, the fist is taking up just about as much space as Kaido's head, and so we understand that there is comparable power here. That Luffy is not weaker than Kaido, that he is having an effect. But on the other hand, Kaido is barely bent, if at all. There's this slight curve here, but he is basically still a sturdy rectangle of a man, at least in his head. And that sturdiness conveys that he is not broken here. He might be hit, but he is going to tank this. This page is everything that Oda loves to do in an impact page. We start up here, of course, and our eye can go straight down here in the direction of the motion as Kaido's head goes down. Or our eye can go over to Luffy and then go straight down in the direction that Kaido is flying in. There is no escaping it. Either way, your eye is going straight down with Kaido and really feeling that motion. The shape language here is pretty intentional. We have this oval around Luffy that conveys his power, and it's a very wide one. It's taking up a lot of the page, not as much as Kaido, but it is in the background, whereas if we had just a small oval, it might not feel like he's that powerful. We have this spikiness to convey each impact, both the impact from Luffy up here, although this might be his fist slamming back, I'm not sure, and from the impact that hit Kaido itself. Kaido is a slightly implied triangle, as we have all these lines coming up from him. We have this curve in the ground he hits that makes him feel like a big arrow pointing in the direction he's moving in. We also have these flames essentially acting as speed lines and guiding our eye down exactly where Kaido's head went. And the other thing these flames serve to do is help Kaido's head stand out. If we didn't have white flames outlining him, then it would be a lot harder to make out where his head is, and just much more confusing as an image. But with these, we understand that his head is right down into the rocks. And most importantly, you have a sense of distance between the impact and between Kaido's head itself. If you have the impact right up against the character's head, then you know that it hit them, but you don't get the sense that it really destroyed them. This distance tells us that very quickly, in the span of a manga page, which is usually a pretty quick span of time, he went flying that far and thus that fast. Thus, the attack had a major effect. Kaido is not in full control of himself. He is very literally upside down on this page. That is not a position someone's in when they're in full control. Now, as we transition out of the action, there's a little less to talk about. I love this quick close-up from Big Mom as we convey how fast all this is happening, but still take the moment to see that something's happening to her. And I love this silhouette of Luffy, because if you notice, we also don't see his face up here. The page is holding back on us just a little before it finally shows this is how Luffy feels. This is how resolute he is. On this page, Kaido and Big Mom's faces are small, and Luffy's is huge because he's the big dog now. I mean, if you've read past this, you know that the fight does not go that easily at all, but in this moment at least, Luffy's in control, and Luffy is the one to beat. I hope you enjoyed this episode of One Piece Paneling Dojo. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more of this, like the video if you want to help me as a YouTuber, and comment if you have anything else to add about the paneling of this chapter, or if you have a future chapter that you'd like to request that I talk about. I will be back next week to talk about the next new chapter, and I hope you have a good one.